Alright, hello fellow sapiens. Sit back, relax, and prepare to wander into the quiet machinery behind our most familiar feeling, stress, and why this ancient emergency mode designed to save us is now quietly wearing us down. This is why stress is destroying us. The ancient emergency mode we never turn off. Now imagine this. A world without thought, without memory, without even the faintest spark of consciousness. Just warm seas rolling over barren continents, the water thick with minerals and drifting particles of life. For hundreds of millions of years, nothing in these oceans has ever truly felt anything at all. Life reacts, yes, but it does not yet sense. It flows as currents flow and divides as chemistry divides. But then something begins to change. The world becomes louder, brighter, more dangerous. And in this expanding storm of new creatures, the first hint of what we would one day call fear slowly takes shape. In the long quiet before the Cambrian seas awakened, survival was almost a passive state. Early organisms drifted like tiny islands of chemistry, responding only to direct touch or changes in acidity. But slowly, microscopic tissues grew more sophisticated, ion channels flickered. Membranes folded inward. Something close to a decision entered the picture, though nothing remotely aware of itself was alive yet. A stimulus could travel across a cell's surface, then across clusters of cells, like a whisper passed from one tentacle to another. Life was still simple, but the quiet was ending. During the vast era we refer to as the Cambrian explosion, a period stretching roughly from 500 million to a little over 300 million years ago, the oceans became an arms race. Predators appeared that could move quickly, grasp, slice and swallow. Vision sharpened in forms we can barely imagine. Armour thickened, spines grew. Suddenly, organisms that had once been slow, soft bodies drifting on currents were being hunted by creatures that attacked without warning. And for the first time in Earth's history, not sensing danger meant extinction. Those who reacted fastest survived. Those who did nothing vanished. It is here that the earliest ingredients of what we now call stress first assembled themselves into a working whole. Picture one of these early creatures, perhaps a worm-like body pressed against the sea floor. Its world is a haze of silt and gentle pressure, with no understanding of threat, only reflex. A ripple of water presses against its side. In earlier ages it would not have mattered, but now the ripple might be the approach of a trilobite, or a spined predator gliding silently through the dim, those first nervous systems, built from nothing more than linked cells capable of passing electrical signals, allowed these organisms to do something new, respond before the jaws arrived. A small contraction, a sudden wriggle, the faint suggestion of avoidance. This is not fear as we know it, or anything with emotion. It is physics making an offer to biology. If you can react just a little faster, you will live one more day. As the Cambrian world became more violent, the complexity of these rapid responses increased. Neurons emerged, specialized cells capable of sending electrical pulses far faster than chemical diffusion alone. Bundles of neurons formed simple networks. Circuits developed that could receive information on one end and produce a muscular reaction on the other. Suddenly, life could sense pressure waves, detect shifts in light, and respond to chemical traces that hinted something larger was near. These networks began to wire themselves into patterns that favored escape, contraction, or freezing. Each of these strategies still describes the basic logic of survival today. Flee if you can. Fight if you cannot escape. Freeze if neither is possible. The first creatures to assemble these circuits gained a profound advantage. They could act before the predator reached them, And so, over age after age, the sensitivity of these systems sharpened. If we slow this history down and examine the mechanics of it, we find 4 simple principles. The first is detection, the ability to register a change in the world that might indicate danger. In early oceans, this could be a shadow passing overhead, or a vibration carried through the sea floor. The second principle is transmission, the movement of that information from the sensory surface to clusters of cells capable of coordinating a response. The third principle is prioritization, directing energy to the structures needed for escape, even if it means momentarily disrupting other processes like digestion or growth. And the fourth is action, the swift contraction of muscles, the sudden shift in direction, the freezing of the body to become invisible against the sediment. Put together, these 4 principles form the earliest model of stress, an abrupt reorganization of the organism toward survival. Across millions upon millions of years, these circuits grew more elaborate. Some species developed clusters of neurons that functioned like tiny command centers. These centers allowed information from multiple senses to converge, compare, and make crude assessments. In certain early arthropods, scientists studying fossilized nervous tissue have found evidence of surprisingly advanced sensory integration. The creature could detect both direction and intensity of ripples, distinguishing between harmless flows and the stealthy approach of predators. Again, nothing like emotion existed. But the machinery behind emotion was being assembled piece by molecular piece. If you imagine these seas with the clarity of a modern Dive, they do not look like the serene blue worlds often painted in textbooks. They were dim, cloudy, crowded, and full of ambush. Predators like anomalocarids swept through the gloom, with jointed appendages and slicing mouth parts. Smaller organisms scuttled across microbial mats. Worms burrowed rapidly into the sediment at the first sign of turbulence. This world demanded instant decisions, and deep within its inhabitants, the neural circuits that could issue those decisions were growing in complexity. For the first time, a creature could shift from a resting state to a survival state. In a fraction of a second, life became dynamic, responsive, and alert. One of the remarkable patterns visible in the fossil record is that development of early sensory systems coincides with the rise of predation pressure. Eyes evolved multiple times independently in this period. Light-sensitive patches grew into primitive lenses, allowing organisms to see movement rather than only detect brightness. Seeing movement meant detecting danger sooner. Detecting danger sooner meant living long enough to pass on genes that favoured fast response. In this sense, the ocean itself was selecting for vigilance. Each generation that survived carried a slightly more refined version of the emergency system. There is another subtle dimension to this history that often goes unnoticed. Organisms did not only need to respond to danger, they needed to return to a baseline state afterward. The earliest creatures still had to digest food, grow tissues, repair damage, and reproduce. A system that stayed activated too long would burn through limited resources and collapse. So the same circuits that produced rapid responses also required a way to quiet themselves once the danger passed. This simple balance between activation and restoration shaped the physiology of countless species. If activation happened too slowly, the organism died. If restoration failed, the organism exhausted itself. Evolution carved away the extremes, leaving behind a system tuned to the rhythm of threat and calm. Some scientists studying living descendants of ancient lineages, such as jellyfish and simple marine worms, point out that their responses to danger are still governed by these early principles. A sudden stimulus triggers a violent contraction, followed by a period of stillness. it is easy to overlook the ancient wisdom inside that twitch. It is the fossil of a pattern that saved lives for hundreds of millions of years. We often imagine the past as a simpler place, but in truth simplicity hides astonishing complexity. Even in these early oceans, before vertebrates dominated, life was already experimenting with electrical signaling, with circuits that enhanced survival, with systems that sculpted behavior long before behavior existed in any recognizable form. And although the nervous systems of these organisms were tiny compared to what would come later, their logic persists today. Every creature that responds to danger does so using principles first etched into biology during this ancient period. The sudden jolt, the tightening of tissues, the redirecting of energy, all of it began in seas thick with predators no eye has seen for hundreds of millions of years. If you listen closely to this history, you may sense something uncanny. The very first stress responses were not about emotion or thought. They were geometry, electricity, and chemistry, arranged in ways that allowed living things to survive, environments too dangerous to navigate slowly. This early blueprint has never left the biological world. It grew more complex, more layered, and eventually more entangled with memory and learning, but it has always served the same purpose: detect danger and respond quickly enough to survive it. We will never know exactly what it felt like to be one of these ancient creatures. There was no self to do the feeling. But we can trace the evolving machinery with surprising accuracy. Fossils preserve neural patterns in some rare cases. Genomes preserve the molecular architecture of stress pathways. Living organisms preserve ancestral reflexes that still initiate contraction, escape, or freezing with remarkable similarity to their distant predecessors. Through these clues, the ancient seas tell us a quiet truth. Before life could think, it had to sense. Before life could explore, it had to react. And before anything like fear could exist, a creature needed the ability to recognize danger in a world full of jaws. We do not need to project emotion backward into deep time to appreciate the scale of this transformation. The emergence of stress responses was one of the most consequential transitions in the history of life. It marked the moment biology learned to anticipate rather than simply endure. The oceans that once drifted quietly became full of silent signals. Pressure waves, shadows, chemical traces, and life learned to listen. What we call stress today began as nothing more than a shift from stillness to motion, from feeding to fleeing. But hidden inside that shift is the spark of something we now consider fundamental: the ability to respond to the unexpected. The creatures who mastered that ability filled the world with descendants. Those who could not fell into extinction's long archive. In this sense, the earlier stress responses are not just remnants of ancient seas. They are the scaffolding on which all later forms of adaptation were built. If there is a quiet realization to end with, it is this. What we interpret as emotion much later in the evolutionary story began as a simple pulse travelling through tissue, a ripple telling a creature in the dark that something was approaching. That ripple changed everything. Life became alert, the world became unpredictable, and biology began the long journey toward awareness, one electrical signal at a time. Welcome to Sleepless Homo, a place for soft science and slow storytelling, where we explore deep time, calm curiosity, and the archaeology of being. I'm just a humble researcher with a microphone, thinking out loud beside a fire that went out 50,000 years ago. If you enjoy these deep late-night journeys, whether you're listening in bed, studying, driving, or just trying to quiet the noise of modern life, feel free to gently tap like or subscribe. It helps other sleepless minds find these calm stories too. And if you drift off at any point, timestamps are waiting for you when you return. All right, let's continue. And as always, stay curious, stay calm. Imagine this, a world growing louder with footsteps, not the soft disturbances of Cambrian seas or the flicker of early neural impulses, but the thud of bodies on land. For the first time, plants rise, insects scatter, and among the ferns and swampy forests of the late Paleozoic and early Mesozoic, something extraordinary begins. Creatures not only sense danger now, they prepare for it. Signals travel inside them, not just as electrical flashes, but as slow chemical messengers that change the way an entire body behaves. Before long, these messengers begin to decide who survives long enough to leave descendants. Life is stepping into a new level of internal strategy, and the rules of survival are being rewritten from the inside out. To understand this turning point, we need to imagine Earth between roughly 280 million years ago and 65 million years ago. This is a span so vast it defies casual thought, but it is within this window that endocrine stress systems began to take shape. The oceans that once governed early nervous systems have been replaced by forests, deserts, swamps, and open plains. Land is no longer a refuge from danger, it is a labyrinth of it. Here, many predators do not appear in the line of sight until they are already close. Temperature swings are harsh, food is uncertain, movement burns far more energy than drifting in water ever did, and so evolution begins to favour organisms that can coordinate their internal resources rapidly, decisively, and with far more nuance than pure electrical reflexes could allow. If the earlier stress responses were sparks of electricity racing along simple circuits, then the next evolutionary innovation is the slow burn of hormones. Think of hormones as chemical broadcasts sent through the bloodstream, reaching tissues that nerves alone cannot manage. These messages do not work instantly, they work thoroughly. They reorganize metabolism, shift energy priorities, and change behavior for minutes, hours, or days at a time. Somewhere deep within the ancestors of reptiles, the first crude hormone responses begin to coordinate whole-body survival strategies. Again, these are not emotions. These are biological instructions that tell the body what it must become in specific moments of danger. Early reptiles faced environmental threats very different from those in the sea. They had to regulate their body temperature through behavior rather than internal heating. Sunlight, shade, water, and wind all determined how quickly a reptile could flee or fight. Hormones became powerful tools for adjusting metabolism depending on warmth and threat levels. When a predator was near, some species needed to push themselves far beyond their resting capacity. Electrical impulses alone could not sustain the effort. They needed chemicals that could mobilize sugar reserves, increase muscle output, and maintain high activity long enough to escape evolution, answered with molecules that resemble, in ancestry at least, the adrenaline-like compounds we know today. When we study modern reptiles, these ancestral templates are still visible. A lizard confronted by a sudden shadow does not rely solely on reflex. Its body undergoes a rapid internal shift. Blood sugar rises, muscles tense, respiration changes. These reactions reveal deep evolutionary roots. Although we cannot observe the hormones directly in long-extinct animals, we can infer their presence through a combination of comparative biology, fossil morphology, and the genetic continuity that binds modern species to their ancient relatives. Bone microstructures show metabolic changes consistent with bursts of intense activity. Trackways preserved in ancient mud capture moments where creatures suddenly accelerated from stillness to speed. All of these traces point to internal mechanisms more sophisticated than simple neural signals. The rise of more advanced predators pushed these systems further. By the time the first large archosaurs appeared, life on land had become a constant negotiation between energy conservation and explosive action. Large reptiles relied on ambush or speed depending on their body plan. Herbivores responded with heightened vigilance and bursts of escape behavior. Hormonal systems became essential not only for reacting to predators, but for sustaining long chases across open terrain. It is one thing to dart away for a second or two, it is another to sprint across dry earth long enough to outdistance a creature with jaws built for tearing through armor. Endocrine systems allowed bodies to remain in a heightened survival state, powering extended exertion far beyond what simple neural circuits could manage. Another transformation unfolds in this era: the shift from cold-blooded to warm-blooded metabolism in early mammalian ancestors. Warm-blooded bodies are extraordinarily expensive to maintain. They burn energy continuously, even at rest. They also provide remarkable advantages. A creature with stable internal heat can move at dawn, dusk, or night without becoming sluggish. It can chase, climb, burrow, and forage without waiting for the sun. But this freedom comes at a cost. To keep a high metabolic rate stable, an organism needs to regulate its internal chemistry with extraordinary precision. Hormones become the conductors of this new symphony. They determine how fast energy is used, how quickly heat is produced, and how rapidly muscle fibers can respond. Somewhere in the ancestry of early mammals, endocrine systems begin integrating stress responses with metabolic regulation. This is a transformation with enormous evolutionary consequences. Imagine one of these early mammalian ancestors, perhaps a small nocturnal creature living under the towering presence of reptilian giants. Its life depends on listening, smelling, and reacting to predators much larger than itself. When danger stirs the underbrush or a distant thud vibrates through the soil, this creature's survival hinges on the speed of its internal chemistry. A burst of heat production reddens its muscles. Hormonal signals mobilize energy. Electrical impulses direct the movement. The combination of nervous system and endocrine response becomes a duet. This duet may be one of the greatest survival inventions in the history of life. We do not need to imagine all of this from scratch. Fossils offer hints. The structure of limb bones reveals whether a creature relied on bursts of speed or long endurance. The shape of respiratory cavities hints at metabolic demands. Even the microstructure of teeth can suggest whether an organism needed fast digestion to sustain high-energy lifestyles. These clues do not speak in sentences. They whisper. They suggest patterns of life where hormones likely played an active role in balancing energy, temperature, and rapid shifts between resting and survival states. One particularly fascinating pattern arises in the transition from sprawling reptilian limbs to more upright stances in early mammalian ancestors. Upright posture suggests sustained activity, which in turn implies internal heat production. All of this points toward endocrine systems capable of managing increased metabolic load. It is difficult to imagine such creatures thriving. If their stress responses were limited only to the rapid electrical circuits of earlier life forms, chemical messages were required to support the long, complex, and energetically expensive responses demanded by terrestrial life. By the time dinosaurs dominated the planet, endocrine stress systems had diversified across countless species. Some animals relied on sudden bursts of energy. Others used chemicals to slow metabolism during drought or scarcity. Many used hormonal signals to time reproduction with environmental cycles, ensuring offspring were born when food was available. Survival was no longer only a matter of sprinting away. It involved adjusting internal states for entire seasons, not just moments. Hormones allowed organisms to plan, not with thought, but with physiology. As the ages progressed and new creatures emerged, these internal systems continued to adapt. Flying reptiles needed rapid shifts between resting states, and energetic flight aquatic reptiles required internal regulation that responded to pressure and temperature changes. Burrowing species needed hormonal cues to manage oxygen scarcity. Every way of living demanded its own version of internal communication. The stress response, once a simple contraction triggered by electrical signals, had become a complex suite of chemical adjustments tailored to each species' lifestyle. Life had evolved not only to react but to anticipate. The era between 280 million and 65 million years ago is not often described as the age of hormones, but in many ways it deserves that title. It is here that endocrine systems became central to survival. It is here that adrenaline-like chemicals first helped creatures push their bodies past their normal limits. It is here that metabolism and stress began to merge into one interconnected strategy, and it is here that the ancestors of warm-blooded creatures developed the machinery that would one day shape the survival systems of far more complex organisms. What we can say with humility is that the fossil record offers only fragments of this story. Bones cannot tell us the precise shape of chemical pathways. Teeth cannot reveal the exact molecules that flooded an animal's bloodstream during a chase. But comparative biology, evolutionary continuity, and ancient anatomy suggest that by the time the great reptiles walked the earth, life had mastered a second layer of response, one that acted slowly, thoroughly, and decisively. This second layer would remain part of the biological world forever. And so the world changed not only because predators evolved sharper claws or stronger jaws, but because bodies evolved internal languages that allowed them to marshal energy at a moment's notice. A creature could now become something different for a short while. Faster, stronger, more alert, and when the danger passed, it could return to a quieter rhythm, saving its strength for the next challenge. In this sense, hormones carved out a new kind of time within living bodies. Moments of crisis and moments of rest no longer followed directly from the environment. They were orchestrated internally, each creature conducting its own survival as conditions demanded. There is a quiet insight that lingers at the end of this long chapter. The endocrine systems refined across these millions of years would one day shape the emotional lives of creatures far more complex. But in these ancient eras, they were simply tools for survival, nothing more, nothing less. Chemical whispers that told a body when to hold energy tight and when to unleash everything it had. And somewhere in this chemical choreography, the foundation was laid for all the intricate stress responses that would emerge later in Earth's story. Imagine this: a small, warm body trembling in the dark. The night forest is alive with distant footsteps, rustling leaves, and the slow, cold patience of predators many times its size. The creature crouched beneath a fallen branch cannot match their strength, or their teeth, or their sheer size, but it carries something inside no reptile ever mastered. Its body burns like a tiny furnace. It is warm in the cold, awake while others are slow. And inside that warmth is a cost, a furnace always hungry, a life lived one heartbeat away from starvation. Every moment of alertness is expensive. Every dash through the undergrowth burns precious energy, and evolution begins shaping something new. A stress system faster, sharper, and more relentless than anything the world has seen before. To understand why mammals became the anxious survivors of prehistory, we have to appreciate what warm blood really means. Most creatures in earlier eras relied on the sun, the air, or the ground to set the pace of their day. Their internal chemistry slowed when temperatures dropped. Their movements followed the rhythm of the environment, But mammals broke that dependency. They created heat from within, transforming each cell into an engine. This gave them a stunning advantage. They could move in cold dawns, forage in chilly evenings, and climb through night branches while reptiles lay still. Yet this gift was also a trap. Maintaining a constant internal temperature demands enormous energy. A warm-blooded animal cannot coast. It must eat often, rest efficiently, and avoid wasting any burst of effort. In such a fragile energy budget, the stress response becomes central to survival. Warm-blooded physiology did not evolve as a single leap. It unfolded over millions of years, beginning with small synapsid ancestors in the shadow of reptilian giants. These early creatures were not the masters of their world. They were the hunted, the overlooked, the ones who survived because something about their bodies kept them ready when others slept. Their higher metabolic rate meant their muscles recovered faster. Their nerves fired more quickly. Their reflexes cut through the cold night air when predators least expected it. But running a high-performance engine in a dangerous world required exquisite internal coordination. Hormonal signals, refined across countless generations, allowed these creatures to shift rapidly between states of low energy use and sudden emergency response. This is where the evolutionary pressure toward vigilance begins to harden into something deeper. A warm-blooded animal must be attuned to the world at all times, because falling into a sluggish state can cost its life. Unlike reptiles that can shut down for hours to save energy, mammals pay rent on their metabolism every minute. This constant expense forces them into shorter sleep cycles, faster reactions, and tighter feedback loops between senses and muscles. Their bodies start to depend on a stress system that can activate not just quickly, but efficiently, delivering bursts of power without collapsing the delicate balance of energy that keeps them warm. This need shapes brain architecture, sensory organs, and the very rhythms of behavior. As the world entered the early Cenozoic after the extinction of the great dinosaurs around 65 million years ago, mammals burst into an ecological opportunity unlike anything before. Forests expanded across continents, filling with insects, fruits, and flowering plants. New predators emerged. Some descended from ancient lineages, others entirely new. As mammals diversified, they carried with them their metabolic engine and the stress systems that supported it. Small primate ancestors leapt between branches in the half-light of dawn, relying on fast processing of visual cues to avoid falls and ambushes. Early ungulates outran predators across open plains. Burrowing species darted underground at the slightest vibration. Everywhere mammals took root, the tempo of life increased. Night activity became a defining advantage. Many early mammals escaped competition by living hours that reptiles could not tolerate. But the night is a dangerous place. Sight is limited. Sounds echo strangely, and scents drift unpredictably. Navigating this world required not only sharp senses but memory. If an animal can remember where predators lurk, where food hides, or where safe paths lie, it reduces the need for constant high-energy vigilance. Over millions of years, memory circuits developed to complement the stress response. This does not mean these creatures remembered the world with anything close to human depth, but they learned enough to build internal maps. The combination of warm blood, alert senses, and rudimentary memory created a formula for survival that would dominate the next many millions of years. When scientists study modern mammals, especially small nocturnal ones, they find behaviors that reflect this deep past. Rapid startle responses, heightened auditory processing, and near-constant scanning of the environment are not signs of emotional unease. They are ancient, hardwired survival tools. A sudden rustle in the leaves can prompt a burst of speed lasting only seconds, but those seconds are shaped by millions of years of selection. The internal chemistry that powers this burst has to be delivered fast and without hesitation. For warm-blooded animals, hesitating is fatal. Their stress systems evolve not just to react, but to preempt. This preemptive capacity is one of the defining traits of mammalian evolution. A creature can prepare for danger before it arrives. As mammals grew in size and diversity, their stress systems diversified as well. Large predators needed systems capable of sustaining pursuit. Herbivores required systems optimized for early detection and swift escape. Semi-aquatic mammals balanced thermal regulation with the need to surface quickly. Tree dwellers needed precise control over sudden muscle contractions to prevent fatal falls. Each way of living demanded its own modulation of stress responses. The endocrine and nervous systems collaborated more intricately with each specialization. And in several groups, including early primates, these systems became intertwined with increasingly complex senses. Primates in particular evolved eyes that faced forward, enhancing depth perception for life in the trees. Such vision allowed rapid calculation of distances between branches, but it also meant detecting predators more effectively. Larger brains developed to process visual information in greater detail, and as brain complexity increased, so did the integration of stress systems with learning and memory. The ability to remember threats became nearly as important as reacting to them. A predator's call echoing from one part of a forest could shape a primate's movement patterns for weeks. This linking of memory and stress was not emotional, as we understand emotion today, but functional. A warm-blooded animal using a large fraction of its energy budget on survival cannot afford to relearn danger every day. Remembering saves energy. Memory becomes a tool of metabolic efficiency. The fossil record supports these shifts, albeit subtly. In the inner ear bones of early primates, we see structures associated with fine balance and rapid movement. In limb bones, we find signs of agile climbing and sudden jumping. Tooth morphology suggests diets requiring constant foraging, which in turn reflects a fast metabolism. Brain endocasts give clues to expanding sensory regions. Each of these traits implies a life on the edge of vigilance. Every adaptation is a small window into a world where internal chemistry and external threat shaped each other continuously. One of the clearest signals of mammalian stress evolution is the development of consistent body temperature regulation across wide climatic ranges. Warm-blooded animals that ventured into colder environments needed to maintain heat, even when food was scarce. This required hormonal systems that could adjust energy use on a daily basis. A creature facing hunger, cold, and predators simultaneously needed the ability to ration its responses. Too much activation, and it starved. Too little, and it was caught. These conditions shape the calibration of stress intensity, duration, and frequency. If early reptiles treated stress as a rare but profound event, mammals lived closer to its edge, dipping into elevated states multiple times each day. Across the Cenozoic, as climates shifted and landscapes changed, mammals expanded into nearly every ecological niche. Desert species evolved responses to conserve water during stress. Tundra species developed thick fur and metabolic surges to escape predators in the snow. Tropical mammals refined rapid arboreal escapes. Underground species evolved stress responses tuned to low oxygen conditions. All of these variations flowed from a shared evolutionary engine, a warm, hungry body reliant on chemical precision to survive. What strikes me, as a humble observer piecing together these ancient clues, is how little we truly know. Bones and fossils cannot show us hormones. They cannot reveal the exact pathways that governed early mammal stress responses, but the patterns in anatomy, behaviour, and modern physiology suggest a consistent story. Warm blood demanded a stronger, faster, more adaptive stress system. It required vigilance, memory, and constant readiness. It shaped creatures that survived not because they were the strongest, but because they were the most attuned to danger at every scale. And there is a quiet realization embedded within this long chronology. Mammals, with their warm bodies and bright senses, became the carriers of a survival strategy built around anticipation. They lived in a world of risk that never slept. Their stress responses became extensions of their metabolism, and the intricate machinery that kept them alive through millions of years of night and danger would eventually become the foundation of far more complex nervous systems. Imagine this, a clearing at dawn in an ancient African landscape, 5 million years before anything that resembles our world. The air is cool, the grass is heavy with dew, and a small group of early hominins stands perfectly still as something stirs at the edge of the brush. They cannot outrun most of the predators that roam here. Their limbs are built for distance, not explosive power. Their bodies are small, their defences few, and yet something inside them is changing. Their survival no longer depends only on how fast they can react, but on how far ahead they can think. Stress, once a system built purely for the body, is beginning to shape the mind. To understand this moment, we have to enter a world of shifting climates and restless earth. Between roughly 5 million and 1 million years ago, Africa transformed again and again. Forests expanded, then shrank. Wetlands dried into grasslands, rivers carved new paths. These environments challenged every creature that lived within them, but for early hominins they demanded something unprecedented. The ability to navigate uncertainty not just day by day, but season by season and generation by generation. Living on the ground of an unpredictable world meant that relying on instinct alone was no longer enough. Stress signals that once triggered only physical actions now needed to influence decisions made long before the threat arrived. The earliest hominins lived in landscapes where danger could come from any direction. Staying alive required constant sampling of the world, listening to distant calls, smelling the wind, watching the movement of grass. This scanning was not just a momentary reflex, it became a habit of thought. The stress systems that had once governed only muscle activation began linking with parts of the brain responsible for memory, spatial mapping, and attention. Over time, this created a simple form of foresight, not the elaborate planning of later humans, but an awareness of patterns. If waterholes dried early in 1 year, a group might remember the direction of the last reliable pool. If fruiting trees failed due to drought, they might recall valleys that stayed moist longer. A nervous system built on reflex was being sculpted into one capable of tracking change. Walking upright transformed everything. Bipedalism freed the eyes to scan over tall grasses and opened new pathways across open ground. But walking upright also meant vulnerability. Running on 2 legs is efficient, but slow to accelerate. The stress system had to adapt. When confronted with the danger, these early hominins could not simply sprint away. They had to choose direction carefully, using the ability to see far ahead. This need sharpened the bond between threat detection and long-term memory. A creature that remembered escape paths survived more often than one that relied on luck. Stress became a teacher. Each close encounter carved faint pathways of avoidance that could quietly guide future behaviour. Climate instability pressed this evolution further. Around this time, Africa began cycling through rapid changes in temperature and rainfall, sometimes shifting ecosystems within a few centuries. Hominins living through these oscillations faced constant decisions about where to move, when to travel, and which habitats could sustain them. These stress triggered by uncertainty began shaping a new kind of thinking. Rather than reacting only to direct threats, early hominins began reacting to anticipation of threats. If a dry season lingered too long, stress signals pushed groups toward migration routes that previous generations had taken. If fruiting seasons shortened, individuals learned to diversify their diets. This adaptability was not conscious strategy. It was survival shaped by physiological signals feeding into cognitive circuits that were slowly becoming more flexible. Tool use added another layer. The earlier stone flakes scattered across ancient riverbeds may not look like much, but they mark a monumental shift in the relationship between stress and behaviour. Breaking a stone to create a sharp edge requires foresight. A creature has to imagine a future moment when the tool might be needed, which means stress responses begin aligning with the concept of preparation. The sharp edge offers safety, but it also signals responsibility. A hominin carrying a tool might feel an elevated sensitivity to potential threats, because they now have the ability to act on information before danger arrives. This feedback loop between tools, stress, and cognition created a new dynamic. Preparedness becomes part of daily life. As brains grew modestly in size, the architecture changed. Portions of the cortex expanded, allowing for more detailed interpretation of the world. Memory circuits began storing not just events, but the context around them. A hominin might recall not only that a predator passed through a particular ravine, but that it happened during a dry spell when prey animals had clustered around a shrinking water source. This layering of memory increased the demand for internal coordination. Stress signals could no longer simply toggle between resting and reacting. They had to modulate attention, sharpen senses, and influence decisions based on stored information. Predation pressures sculpted these developments with ruthless consistency. Large cats, ancient hyenas, and crocodiles hunted early hominins relentlessly. Fossil evidence shows injuries consistent with escape attempts, suggesting that vigilance was a daily requirement. But as groups became more observant and more attentive to patterns, the stress response expanded from a momentary burst into a cognitive tool. The creatures who paid close attention to signs of danger lived longer. Those with slightly better memory circuits avoided hazardous regions. Those who learned from mistakes left more descendants. Danger, in this world, was the most effective sculptor of minds. One subtle but important shift is the emergence of shared attention. While we cannot say exactly when early hominins began interpreting the alarm responses of others, evidence from primate behavior suggests this ability has ancient roots. If one individual startled, the group responded. This synchronization of stress created group-level vigilance. Over many generations, this may have reinforced social bonds, but more importantly, it reinforced learning. A young hominin observing an elder react to a threat gained crucial information without having to experience the danger directly. Stress became both personal and communal. Multiple nervous systems tuned themselves to each other, amplifying awareness. A consequence of these shifts is the refinement of long-term memory. The landscape of early Africa was not uniform. It was a mosaic of grassland, woodland, and scrub, each with its own dangers and opportunities. Memory of safe paths became a form of invisible inheritance. Individuals who could recall where seasonal foods appeared were less likely to starve. Those who remembered vantage points where predators could be seen at long distances were more likely to escape. Stress began to stimulate not only reflexes but mental maps. It improved navigation and sharpened the ability to recognize subtle environmental cues. Tool reliance deepened the relationship between stress and cognition further. As stone tools became slightly more complex, hominins began selecting specific types of rock, suggesting familiarity with locations where high-quality stone could be found. This indicates a level of foresight that relies heavily on memory and risk assessment. Carrying a stone tool might have increased vigilance, as the tool represented potential survival in a future conflict or hunt. The internal chemistry that governed stress responses likely played a role in motivating these creatures to maintain and transport tools, embedding preparation into the rhythm of their lives. A circle of hominins settling down as darkness spills across the land 1 million years ago. The heat of the day has drained from the air. Night insects begin their steady hum. The grasslands beyond the clearing soften into silhouettes. In earlier ages, this moment would have been the most dangerous of the entire day. Darkness brought the hunters. Eyes glowed at the forest edge. Every sound was a question. Sleep came in fragments because safety was a privilege these bodies did not yet know. But tonight is different. Tonight a small fire crackles at the centre of the group, casting an island of light into a world that no longer feels completely hostile. Something ancient inside their nervous systems begins to ease. For the first time in the history of life, a species has found a way to turn fear off on purpose. To understand how monumental this shift was, we need to step into the age between roughly 1 million and 200,000 years ago. This is the long twilight of early human evolution, a window filled with hominins who walked upright, made tools, and endured landscapes that challenged them every hour of every day. For millions of years before this period, nightfall meant vulnerability. Almost nothing in the animal world could override the natural spikes of vigilance that darkness triggered. But the discovery and control of fire began to rewrite that rule. Fire changed the relationship between our ancestors and the night. It carved out a boundary where danger paused and calm could return. Archaeological traces of controlled fire during this period appear across Africa and parts of Eurasia. At sites like Wonderwork Cave, microscopic ash layers and burnt bones suggest long-term fire use deep within a cave system. Elsewhere, scattered hearths show repeated burning events tied to occupation layers. These are not the chaotic scatterings of wildfires. They are small, deliberate tended flames, and wherever they appear they carry the same implication. Early humans learned that flame could create zones of safety. Imagine a group gathered around such a fire. Their bodies, shaped by millions of years of reacting to sudden threats, begin to feel the difference between light and dark. The fire's glow pushes the edges of danger further back. Predators hesitate at its perimeter. Insects retreat. The air itself carries a scent that repels many animals. For the first time, the night no longer swallows vision entirely. The nervous system, always on guard, receives a new signal. Safety exists here. Safety can be created. This shift likely had immediate effects on stress regulation. A calm environment at night meant that bodies could fall into deeper, more restorative sleep cycles. Even if sleep was still interrupted and cautious, it lasted longer and carried more value. Rest improves everything from immune function to memory consolidation, but more importantly for this era, it improves reaction time and decision-making. A hominin who sleeps deeply wakes more alert. One who wakes repeatedly in panic wastes precious energy. Fire became a tool for protecting not only the body but cognitive performance. Fire also created predictable rhythms. The flicker, the crackle, the warmth, and the sphere of light provided sensory cues that helped regulate circadian timing. Before fire, sleep depended heavily on ambient temperature and darkness. But with fire, hominins could extend waking hours, socialize, work on tools, and inspect their surroundings in a controlled environment. This consistency likely began anchoring stress responses to a more stable daily rhythm. The body learned when to be on alert and when to relax. In evolutionary time, even small improvements in energy budgeting could have profound consequences. Those who rested well survived better than those who lived in constant vigilance. One of the most important effects of firelight is something subtle. It made fear visible. In darkness, stress spikes in anticipation of unseen danger. In light, the landscape becomes knowable. Shadows reveal shapes. Sounds gain context. The brain no longer has to guess. Even if danger remained possible, the mind could now assess it rather than merely react to it. This assessment is a crucial step in cognitive evolution. A creature that can judge the difference between a rustling leaf and an approaching predator saves immense energy and avoids unnecessary panic. Firelight made such distinctions easier. Communal gathering around the fire strengthened this effect. When individuals sat close together, stress signals became shared occurrences. If someone stiffened or paused mid-breath, others noticed. If someone relaxed, others felt the safety too. This social regulation of stress likely predates language. Bodies communicate through posture, breathing, and movement long before they communicate through words. Sitting in a circle allowed early humans to synchronize these cues. A group that rests together encourages each member to rest. A group that reacts together amplifies threat detection. Firelight amplified both processes, depending on the moment. There is archaeological evidence suggesting that nighttime activity increased with fire. Stone tools found near hearths show signs of retouching in low-light conditions. Cut-marked bones suggest food processing after dark. These activities point to longer waking hours and increased cooperation. Working in groups at night is only possible when danger feels manageable. And danger becomes manageable when light and heat create boundaries where the world is less unpredictable. Each additional hour spent in calm conditions reinforced neural pathways that associated light, warmth, and social closeness with safety. Fire also changed the soundscape of the night. The crackle of wood masked certain noises while drawing attention to others. The quiet hum of insects softened near the flames. These changes reduced the intensity of auditory vigilance. In darkness without fire, the ears must work constantly. Every sound is a question. With fire, many of those questions fade. A stable sound environment reduces unnecessary startle responses and allows cognitive resources to shift toward more complex social interactions. As early humans tended fires across generations, something deeper occurred. Fire became a signal, a symbol of territory, belonging, and continuity. A lit hearth could mean that others had been here before, that the spot was chosen for safety, that someone cared enough to bring fuel. This continuity likely fed into memory circuits that were already developing from earlier cognitive evolution. A site associated with successful nights became a mental landmark. These landmarks helped shape movement patterns, migration decisions, and even seasonal habits. Stress responses began linking not only to immediate cues but to remembered contexts. Consider the difference between sleeping in an unknown region and sleeping in a familiar camp. In a familiar place, danger feels predictable. The mind relaxes more easily. Fire amplified this effect. It turned familiar camps into islands of trust. And as these islands multiplied, early humans created networks of safe zones across their landscapes. Each site represented not just access to resources, but access to calm survival increasingly relied on the ability to find, maintain, and return to these pockets of stability. The role of fire in shaping early social dynamics cannot be overstated. Gatherings around flames offered an environment where individuals could observe one another without distraction. In these settings, group cohesion formed shared vigilance turned into shared rest. The constant dance between alertness and calm became a communal experience. This communal regulation of stress likely laid the groundwork for deeper social connections. Through fire, early humans learned to trust one another in the dark. Nocturnal predators still existed, and danger was never fully gone. But fire provided something new, a way to negotiate fear. This ability represented a shift in the function of stress. Instead of acting only as a reaction to sudden events, stress began interacting with social signals, environmental cues, and internal rhythms. This integration would shape the next phases of human evolution. A creature that can choose when to relax is a creature that can plan. A creature that can plan gains advantages that shape everything from foraging success to reproductive choices. Archaeological sites from this period reveal repeated layers of burnt material, suggesting that fires were maintained over long durations. Maintaining a fire requires attention, cooperation, and knowledge. Groups needed to gather wood, shield flames from wind, and protect them from rain. These tasks likely reinforced social bonds and trained individuals to anticipate needs before emergencies occurred. Firekeeping itself may have been one of the earliest forms of shared responsibility, linking cognitive foresight with communal well-being. What remains remarkable is that fire not only kept predators away but kept minds anchored. In a world filled with abrupt changes, fire offered a consistent sensory experience: warmth, light, and sound. Neuroscience tells us that predictable sensory patterns calm the nervous system. It is reasonable to infer that early humans experienced a similar effect. Fire gave the night a rhythm. It framed conversations, tool-making, grooming, and rest. These repeated behaviors, carried out in a stable environment, helped regulate internal chemistry. Fire became a form of external homeostasis. And as we move through this long past, there is a quiet realization that lingers. The ability to create calm is perhaps one of the most powerful tools any species has ever discovered. Before this era, calm depended entirely on circumstance and chance. After this era, calm became something early humans could make with their own hands. We cannot know every detail. Archaeological traces tell only part of the story. Hearths are scattered across time, but the minds that tended them are gone. All we can do is piece together evidence from burnt bones, ash deposits, and the behaviour of living primates. Yet even with this limited material, a picture emerges. Fire offered early humans a new kind of control, not just over their environment, but over their internal states. And in that control, a foundation was laid for all that would come next. Imagine this: a human standing at the edge of a wide plain 200,000 years ago, breath steady, eyes fixed on the faint outline of an animal disappearing into heat shimmer. The sun is high. The air is dry. Every creature in this landscape reserves its strength, hides from the heat, or moves in bursts that end quickly. But this human does something almost unthinkable in the animal kingdom. They begin to run. Not a sprint, not a desperate chase, but a steady, relentless pursuit that will last for hours. Muscles fire in perfect rhythm. Breathing deepens, sweat beads and cools the skin. Beneath it all, two chemical systems inside the body coordinate with impossible precision. This is not strength alone. This is engineering. Evolution has crafted a stress system capable of powering an entirely new strategy of survival. The emergency mode has become a superpower. To understand how this happened, we need to move into the world between roughly 200,000 and 50,000 years ago. By this time, the hominins alive on Earth possessed a biological architecture indistinguishable from modern humans. Their brains were large, their bodies efficient, and their lives governed by landscapes that demanded extreme physical and mental adaptability, survival depended on flexibility. Some days required endurance hunts that pushed the limits of metabolism. Others required hours of stillness while tracking prey across distant valleys. Sometimes starvation loomed. Sometimes predators forced desperate decisions. In this shifting world, the stress system evolved into something more nuanced than in any species before. The emergency mode that defined earlier mammals was already remarkable, but human ancestors refined it. They developed a dual system in which adrenaline triggered immediate action, while slower hormonal signals sustained effort. Adrenaline delivered explosive readiness, heart rate rising, blood shunting to muscles, reflexes sharpening, senses narrowing toward the most important cues. But adrenaline alone burns out quickly. What allowed humans to push far beyond the limits of other animals was the second wave of internal chemistry, a slower set of signals that mobilized energy reserves and maintained effort over long periods. This partnership between fast and slow internal messengers created a stress response that could shift a body from resting to pursuit and from pursuit to endurance without collapsing the system. Endurance hunting is one of the clearest demonstrations of this capacity. Hunters in this era pursued large animals not by outsprinting them, but by pushing them into exhaustion. Most mammals overheat quickly when running long distances. Humans, with their abundant sweat glands and upright posture, can dissipate heat far more efficiently. But heat management alone does not explain success. The real advantage lies in the internal coordination of effort. When the first burst of adrenaline begins to fade, slower stress signals take over, releasing stored energy from muscles and the liver. This allows the runner to maintain pace long after most animals would need to stop. The pursuit ends not with a dramatic attack, but with the prey's collapse. The emergency mode becomes a strategy, not a reaction. Another powerful context for this system is starvation. During long lean seasons, when food was scarce and migration routes uncertain, humans needed to function at high cognitive levels despite limited calories. The stress system supported this delicate balance. Internal signals could mobilize stored energy when food was not available. They could also sharpen focus, narrow attention, and increase patience during long hunts or foraging expeditions. This does not mean that starvation was pleasant or easy, but it means humans were less likely to lose essential functionality during difficult times. A stress system that could extract energy, maintain mental clarity, and preserve vital functions gave our ancestors longevity in environments where unpredictability was the rule. The landscapes of this era demanded constant awareness. Whether moving across open plains, navigating thickly forested patches, or crossing river valleys, humans had to balance caution with decisive action. The emergency mode supported rapid switches between these states. At the slightest sign of threat, the fast system took over, vision sharpened, hearing heightened, muscles readied for immediate action. When the moment passed, the slower system helped restore balance. This ability to rapidly enter and exit heightened states allowed humans to conserve energy while staying prepared. No other species managed this transition as fluidly. Tracking prey required a similar interplay. When a human followed an animal's footprints, they needed to detect minute signs: a disturbed pebble, a faint bend in the grass, a broken twig. The stress system guided attention with precision. Too much activation would narrow focus too tightly, causing the tracker to miss wider patterns. Too little activation would dull the senses. The balance between vigilance and calm became a signature trait of human survival. It allowed hunters to cover vast territories without succumbing to fear or fatigue. Tool use deepened this connection. A hunter holding a prepared spear or stone tool relied on the stress system not only during the moment of attack, but during the long periods of preparation before it. Shaping stone demanded fine motor skills, patience, and detailed observation. A stress system that could support both high-intensity action and quiet focus became indispensable. The same body that could throw a weapon with force could also sit for hours crafting it. This dual capacity reflects a stress system under sophisticated internal control. Social cooperation pushed these systems even further. Small groups coordinated during hunts, communicated through gesture and posture, and read each other's intentions without spoken language. Successful coordination required shared awareness of threats and opportunities. Stress responses could synchronize among individuals, ensuring that when one sensed danger, the entire group responded. This communal alertness amplified survival. It also meant that stress was no longer solely an individual phenomenon. It flowed through groups as a shared tool. As brains grew more complex, the stress system intertwined with memory and learning. Humans began to understand not only their physical environment, but the patterns embedded within it. They remembered migration paths of animals, seasonal changes in vegetation, and safe resting places. Stress guided the consolidation of these memories. Experiences tied to danger or success were more likely to be stored. This selective memory allowed humans to innovate strategies that relied on long-term knowledge. It also meant that the emergency mode could activate based on anticipation alone, preparing the body for events that had not yet happened, but had happened before. Climate instability during this period pushed adaptability even harder. As environments fluctuated between wetter and drier conditions, humans responded by changing their movement patterns, altering their diets, and shifting their tools. The stress system supported these adjustments by mobilizing energy and sharpening focus during transitions. Without this flexibility, survival through unpredictable cycles would have been nearly impossible. It is important to recognize that this emergency mode did not exist to torment early humans. It existed to protect them. Every feature of the system, from rapid heart rate increases to mobilized energy reserves, served a function. Life at this time was full of shock, scarcity, danger, and opportunity. A body that could respond rapidly, sustain effort, and recover efficiently gave humans a competitive edge unmatched by other species. Even the ability to endure pain during injury or chase was crucial. Pain signals did not disappear, but they could be muted long enough to ensure survival. What makes this system extraordinary is not just its power, but its precision. The human stress response is calibrated to shift resources only when needed. It prioritizes muscles over digestion when action is required. It prioritizes healing and growth when danger recedes. It supports cognitive clarity when decisions matter, and narrows attention when details become important. This orchestration allowed humans to inhabit ecosystems ranging from dense forests to high-altitude plateaus. Each habitat presented different threats and opportunities, but the stress system remained flexible enough to support them all. Some scholars suggest that this era represents the final refinement of the modern human stress response. The patterns observed in modern physiology have roots in this time: the dual system of immediate reaction and sustained support, the interplay between vigilance and calm, and the integration of stress with memory and planning all come from this window of evolution. The bodies and brains of these early humans operated with a finesse honed by countless survival challenges. What stands out most, and what we can say with humility, is how elegant this biological engineering truly is. We do not know every detail. We cannot map every pathway. But the combination of archaeological evidence, comparative biology, and modern physiology paints a consistent picture. humans became masters of the emergency mode, not because they were the strongest, but because they could control effort, endure hardship, and act decisively under pressure. As we step back from this long history, a quiet recognition emerges. The stress system we carry today is not an accident. It is the product of countless generations surviving landscapes filled with uncertainty. It allowed our ancestors to hunt across vast plains, endure harsh seasons, and outthink predators many times their size. It is, in its original form, one of the greatest survival mechanisms evolution ever produced. A quiet stretch of Ice Age grassland, cold enough that each breath hangs in the air like a small ghost. Snow covers the ground in thin sheets, broken only by exposed patches of frozen mud where herds have passed. The sky is pale, the sun low, and the wind harmless for now. A human moves through this landscape with practiced ease. They are wrapped in furs, carrying a spear whose tip has been shaped and sharpened with exquisite care. Their footprints trail behind them in a clean line. This is a world they understand. But in the next few heartbeats, everything in that world will change. At the edge of the clearing, something shifts. A shape, low and muscular, steps from behind a scatter of boulders. A saber-toothed cat, built for ambush rather than chase, stands still, watching its breath puffs in rhythmic clouds, its muscles coiled with silent power. It has chosen this moment carefully, waiting for the human to move just far enough from the rest of the group. For a few heartbeats, neither creature moves. This is the threshold between calm and crisis, between thought and instinct. And inside the human body, an ancient system begins to switch on. The first thing that happens is speed. Not of movement, but of perception. The eyes lock on the predator, and the brain compresses time. Patterns of light sharpen, the outline of muscle beneath the cat's fur becomes clear. The distance between them is calculated in less than a blink. This clarity is not calmness, it is chemistry. The body releases a surge of internal signals that travel faster than thought. These signals trigger a wave of transformation across systems that usually operate quietly, unnoticed. Now they become the center of everything. The heart responds first, contracting with greater force and speed. More blood surges through arteries, delivering oxygen and nutrients to the limbs. The lungs widen, pulling in air at a rate that would feel frantic if the human had time to feel anything at all. This sudden shift floods the muscles with the resources needed for movement that must be immediate, explosive, and decisive. In a matter of seconds, the human has entered a physiological state that would be impossible to maintain for long, but for the next few moments it will define the difference between life and death. Muscle fibers respond with perfect coordination. They recruit extra motor units, small clusters of fibers usually reserved for the most demanding tasks. These are the fibers that produce raw, powerful movement. The body does this automatically, without conscious command. It also alters the way muscles use stored energy, switching from slow, steady consumption to rapid breakdown of energy molecules that can be used instantly. This shift generates tremendous force with astonishing speed, but it comes at a cost. These reserves will burn out quickly. The human has seconds, not minutes, to act. Pain signals dim before they even have a chance to rise. If the human is struck, the pain will not register until the danger is gone. This suppression is not generosity, it is biology. Pain slows movement. Pain demands attention. In this moment, attention must be absolute and directed entirely outward. The body releases molecules that interfere with pain pathways, reducing the intensity of sensation. A cut, a scratch, a blow to the ribs, All of these become background noise. The only focus is survival. Meanwhile, the senses sharpen to an extraordinary degree. Vision narrows into a tunnel that centers the predator. Colors may wash out, details may blur at the edges, but important shapes become intensely vivid. Hearing shifts in priority, amplifying certain frequencies while muting others. The crunch of snow under a moving paw becomes louder than the wind. The breathing of the predator becomes clearer than the hunter's own heartbeat. Smell sharpens too, though subtly. The cold air carries the scent of fur and musk. All these signals converge to give the human a precise understanding of the moment. The human shifts their stance. This is not a conscious decision either. The body adjusts automatically, placing weight slightly to the back leg, lowering the center of gravity, spreading the feet just enough to maintain balance on uneven ground. These adjustments happen faster than any deliberate thought could achieve. In this heightened state, instinct and training merge seamlessly. A hunter who has practiced throwing a spear thousands of times responds with perfect alignment. A hunter, new to the task, still benefits from the body's rapid recalibration. The emergency mode gives even the inexperienced a chance. The saber-tooth moves first. Not a leap, not yet, a calculated step forward. Its head lowers, its shoulder blades rise, its muscles ripple. It is deciding the direction from which to attack. This is a predator that relies on ambush, on a single devastating strike. It needs to close the distance in one burst. But humans have learned to anticipate this pattern. Their survival depends on reading these subtle signals and responding with immediate action. The human acts. In a single motion, they pivot, raise the spear, and release it with more force than they could ever achieve outside this state. The throw is not perfect, no throw is, but it is powerful. The spear arcs through the cold air, propelled by every system working at maximum capacity. The predator reacts, shifting its weight to the side. The spear grazes its shoulder instead of striking cleanly. A wound, but not a fatal one. The predator is startled, not stopped. The encounter is not over. This moment is where the stress system reveals its second purpose. After the first burst of action, the body prepares for what might come next. This could be flight, another attack, or an attempt to reach the other members of the group. Muscles remain tense but ready. Breathing remains fast but controlled. Energy continues to be released from storage. Every part of the body stays primed for the next decision. This sustained readiness can last for minutes if needed, though not without cost. The human begins moving backward, maintaining eye contact, scanning for escape routes. This is not panic, this is precision. The saber-tooth takes a step forward, then stops. The injury is shallow but distracting. The human is facing it directly, refusing to give it the advantage of surprise. The wind shifts, carrying human scent directly toward the predator. The cat hesitates. A second human appears at the edge of the clearing, moving quickly. Then a third. The predator recognizes the change instantly. It was prepared to strike a lone individual. It is not prepared to fight a coordinated group. With a low growl, it retreats, slipping back into the shadow of the rocks. Once the immediate danger passes, the human's body begins the process of recovery. Heart rate slows gradually. Muscles tremble from the intensity of the effort. Breathing returns to normal. Pain signals rise again, now loud and insistent. The shallow wound on the arm that went unnoticed during the crisis now burns. Fatigue sweeps through the body as depleted energy stores demand replenishment. This moment of shaking exhaustion is not weakness. It is the natural cost of using a system designed for a single purpose: survival in acute, life-threatening events. In these moments, the stress system reveals its full architecture. It was not built for long struggles. It was built for decisive, short bursts of extreme effort. The body floods itself with energy, sharpened senses, and powerful movement for only as long as absolutely necessary. When danger ends, the system shuts down and transitions into recovery. The balance between activation and rest is delicate. Too much activation would exhaust the body. Too little would mean death. For hundreds of thousands of years, this balance allowed humans to stand alongside predators many times their size and survive. We often think of humans as fragile compared to the megafauna of the Ice Age. Our claws are small, our teeth unimpressive, our bodies lean. But this is only true if one looks at the surface. Beneath the skin lies an internal network capable of responding to danger with a precision unmatched in the natural world. The saber-tooth moment, the instant when crisis erupts and decisions must happen faster than thought, was the scenario in which the system evolved to perform perfectly. Every part of it, from muscle fiber recruitment to sensory sharpening, from pain suppression to metabolic shifts, exists because moments like this shaped our ancestors' lives. What we know comes from a combination of archaeological traces, comparative biology, and the physiology of modern humans. We cannot recreate every detail. We cannot know every feeling or decision. But the patterns of survival in the ancient world, the demands placed on bodies and brains, and the shared features across mammals give us confidence in the broad strokes. What we can say, with humility, is that the stress system was not designed to torment us. It was designed to save us. And in moments like this, on ancient frozen plains, it did exactly that. A quiet sunrise over a small clearing 10,000 years ago, where the air smells not of smoke from a roaming camp, but of damp earth that has been turned and pressed by human hands. A few stalks of early wheat shimmer in the faint morning light. A simple storage pit sits covered with woven mats. A dog sleeps lightly beside it. No predators stalk the edges of this clearing. No sudden chase will erupt today. For the first time in our species' history, the daily rhythm of survival feels predictable, but something else is happening. Something quieter and heavier. There is no saber-tooth waiting in the dark, yet the chest feels tight. The mind wakes early, the stomach churns. The stakes, once tied to moments of danger, now stretch across seasons. The threat is no longer claws and teeth. The threat is failure. The shift from foraging to farming did not happen all at once. Across different regions of the world between roughly 10,000 and 4,000 years ago, people began experimenting with cultivation, herding, and settlement. These changes created a revolution in human life that transformed diets, landscapes, bodies, and social structures. But they also transformed stress. The physiology shaped for acute, short, decisive responses now met a world that demanded patience, planning, and endurance of pressure that rarely released danger became rare. But expectations became constant. In the age before farming, stress mostly arrived in waves: an approaching predator, a sudden storm, an injury, a long hunt. These events were intense but temporary. Recovering afterward was possible because the body and mind were designed for cycles. Calm followed chaos, rest followed exertion. But in the early farming villages, stress began taking new forms. Instead of acute threats that could be solved with action, stress often came from conditions that stretched across months. The health of crops, the timing of rains, the unpredictability of herds, and the pressure to maintain stores through winter. Archaeological evidence suggests that as settlements grew, skeletal remains began to show signs of chronic strain. Knees, spines, and shoulders reveal repetitive labour patterns: grinding grain, hauling water, bending over fields. These activities were not dangerous in the immediate sense, but they demanded continuous effort. A farmer waking each day to the same tasks faced pressure, unlike the short, intense bursts of hunter-gatherer life. The body's stress systems, once optimized for brief emergencies, now confronted prolonged exertion. Farming required persistence more than bursts of energy. But persistence also meant the body never fully returned to its resting baseline. The pressure of crop success was immense. For the first time, a failed harvest could mean starvation not for a few days but for entire seasons. Anxiety tied to weather patterns became woven into daily life. Clouds on the horizon could bring relief or catastrophe. Archaeological sites in the Fertile Crescent, East Asia and the Americas show clear evidence of storage pits, granaries and communal silos. These structures represent both security and responsibility. Surplus allowed populations to grow, but surplus had to be protected, and its distribution monitored. Meeting these responsibilities created new layers of mental burden. Settlement also brought social change. In small foraging groups, status existed but had fluid boundaries. In early farming villages, long-term settlement enabled hierarchy to solidify. Some families controlled more land, more livestock, or more access to fertile soils than others. These differences appear in house sizes, burial goods, and diet traces in bones. With hierarchy came new sources of stress, competition for resources, anxiety about one's place in the group, pressure to meet expectations tied to roles, and fear of losing status or falling behind. The remains of early agricultural communities also show signs of nutritional stress. Contrary to the assumption that farming made life easier, the first farmers often had poorer diets than the foragers around them. Reliance on a single crop reduced dietary diversity. Deficiencies in minerals and vitamins were common. Stunted growth, reduced dental health, and bone lesions appear at higher rates in early farming populations. These physical stresses interact intimately with internal stress systems. A body undernourished is more reactive, more strained, and less resilient when demands intensify. Farming also changed the rhythm of work in ways that affected stress deeply. Foragers moved with the seasons. Their tasks shifted constantly, tracking animals, gathering fruit, weaving baskets, repairing shelters. Each activity engaged different muscles, different senses, and different social interactions. But farmers often perform the same tasks day after day. Monotony itself can become a form of pressure. The lack of variety in physical movement leads to cumulative strain in specific joints, while the lack of variety in context reduces sensory stimulation. Working the same patch of soil each dawn can shape the mind as much as it shapes the land. Another transformation came from living close to domesticated animals. Herd management required constant vigilance, protecting animals from predators, monitoring their health, maintaining enclosures. While not as dangerous as hunting megafauna, this responsibility created long-term tension. If a disease swept through a herd, it could erase years of investment. Archaeological records show that early domestic animals suffered from high rates of illness, and their human caretakers would have been deeply tied to their survival. The emergence of storage also introduced the concept of theft. In nomadic life, possessions were minimal and carried. In settled life, accumulated food created temptation. Systems of guarding, watching, and regulating access became essential. This meant new forms of stress around trust, responsibility, and vigilance. A granary is not a natural object. It is a promise and a burden. Someone must oversee it, maintain it, and protect it. Someone must decide how grain is distributed during lean times. These decisions create social tension and personal pressure. Weather, once a shifting backdrop of foraging life, became central. The success or failure of a year's work could hinge on rainfall patterns. Archaeological climate data suggests periods of drought in early agricultural regions that would have created immense anxiety. Imagine fields cracking in the heat while a community watches the sky with growing desperation. This is stress, unlike the immediate terror of a predator attack. It is slow, heavy, and unrelieved. The body's emergency systems cannot solve a drought, but the mind must live through it. Evidence from skeletal remains also shows increased incidence of injuries related not to violence but to overwork. Stress fractures in the legs and feet reflect long hours carrying loads. Wear patterns on teeth suggest habitual use of teeth as a third hand. These chronic stresses accumulate silently over years and decades. The mind, shaped by evolution to handle acute threats, now had to navigate a world where burdens did not retreat after minutes or hours. The birth of settlements changed social dynamics profoundly. Living in close quarters created friction. Conflicts that once resolved themselves through distance or dispersion now persisted. Archaeological evidence of boundary walls, defensive structures, and controlled entrances suggests that even within early villages, humans needed to regulate collective behaviour. Managing disputes required emotional control, negotiation, and patience. These demands placed constant pressure on individuals in a way that our older biological systems were not originally designed for. The gendered division of labour that emerges in many early farming societies also shapes stress patterns. Women often perform demanding, repetitive tasks tied to food processing, childcare, and domestic work. Their bones show particular wear patterns consistent with grinding grains. Men often handled field labour or herding, tasks requiring long hours under sun and unpredictable conditions. Both roles lacked the episodic nature of earlier foraging tasks. Both involved persistent pressure. Yet despite these burdens, farming offered something new: predictability. Not perfect predictability, but enough stability to build communities, raise children in one place, and imagine a future beyond the next season. This continuity supported cultural growth. People built homes of stone, mud, or wood. They developed rituals around planting and harvest. They created systems of cooperation that allowed for larger populations. These developments created their own pressures, of course, but they also created meaning. Stress no longer revolved only around survival. It revolved around responsibilities, expectations, and aspirations. With settled life came the need for planning months or years ahead. The ability to store grain, breed livestock, and maintain irrigation systems demanded long-term thinking. Stress responses began interacting more deeply with cognitive processes that evaluated future consequences. The mind learned to worry about outcomes not yet visible. The body learned to respond to uncertainties not yet realized. This fusion of anticipation and responsibility marks one of the most profound changes in human stress history. We can trace some of these changes through the remnants of early cities and towns. At Çatalhöyük, buildings packed tightly together indicate constant social proximity. At Jericho, defensive towers rise from the past, suggesting worries about conflict. At early Chinese settlements, irrigation systems show coordinated labour that required group effort and shared tension. These structures reflect not only ingenuity, but the invisible pressures that shaped daily life. What we see, looking back with humility, is that farming did not simply change how humans ate, it changed how they felt. It introduced a world where stress was no longer an occasional visitor, but a companion tied to responsibility, hierarchy, and seasons. It shifted stress from moments of action to sustained periods of waiting. It transformed fear of predators into fear of failure. and in doing so it began shaping human minds in new ways, minds that could plan, anticipate, and worry. We do not know every detail. Bones can tell us how bodies bent, but not how minds raced at night. Storage pits tell us how communities prepared, but not how individuals fretted over rain or frost. Yet with every layer of soil, every worn joint, every abandoned field, the picture becomes clearer. Early farmers carried stresses unfamiliar to their ancestors, stresses that did not fade when the sun rose. In this era, the nature of human pressure changed forever. Imagine this. You're standing atop a mud brick wall in an early Bronze Age city, around 4,000 years before the Common Era. Below you stretches a dense maze of homes, workshops, granaries, and streets so narrow that sunlight only reaches them for a brief moment each day. Smoke hangs in the morning air. Voices rise from every direction. A child cries, a pot shatters, livestock bleat from rooftop pens, and somewhere in the distance, a guard calls for a shift change. You have lived your entire life inside these walls, surrounded by thousands of people. No predator stalks the perimeter, no saber-tooth waits in the dark, and yet your chest feels tight. Your pulse quickens for reasons you cannot name. For the first time in human evolution, the greatest dangers do not come from outside the city, they come from inside it. To understand how stress changed during the rise of civilizations, we need to step carefully through time. Beginning around 4,000 years before the Common Era and continuing into the early modern world of the 18th century, humans transformed themselves into urban creatures. Villages became cities, and cities became states. Populations grew far beyond the tight bands of hunter-gatherers or early farmers. This expansion produced wonders: monumental architecture, writing systems, mathematics, long-distance trade, and intricate cultures. It also produced a new category of stress, one shaped by crowds, hierarchies, scarcity, noise, and constant social evaluation. Where once stress had been a tool for immediate survival, it now became a companion woven into the structure of daily life. Archaeology gives us a stark view of early city life. Skeletal remains recovered from ancient urban centres often show far more signs of stress than those found in smaller farming villages or among nomadic groups. Linear enamel hyperplasia, bands on teeth that form during periods of childhood stress, appear frequently in remains from ancient Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and early Egyptian towns. These markers indicate interruptions in growth caused by illness, malnutrition, or psychological upheaval. Crowded living conditions contributed to disease transmission, while reliance on a limited set of crops increased vulnerability to shortages. Children raised in dense cities often grew up under greater biological pressure than children in rural communities. In cities, space meant everything. Homes were pressed against one another. Streets filled with refuse, human waste, and the sounds of constant movement. Privacy, which for most of human history meant the ability to step away from others and recover, became scarce. Stress systems shaped for open landscapes and flexible movement now operated inside narrow, confined spaces. Noise levels increased dramatically. Anthropologists studying traditional small-scale societies note that humans evolved in acoustic environments where the loudest daily sound might be distant animal calls or wind across grass. Ancient cities shattered this pattern. Hammering metal, bleating goats, shouted conversations, water sellers, craftspeople, and the general din of thousands living together created a constant background of stimulation that the body responded to whether one wanted it to or not. The rise of hierarchy layered additional pressure onto daily life. In small foraging groups, social differences existed but were limited by mobility and shared resources. In cities, hierarchy became structural. Unequal access to food, labour and protection created disparities visible in the archaeological record. Skeletons of the wealthy show better nutrition, fewer signs of repetitive labour, and sometimes fewer injuries. Those of the poor show heavy wear on joints, signs of physical strain from grinding grain or hauling loads, and evidence of childhood malnutrition. These differences reflect not only physical hardship, but also the stress of social comparison, a phenomenon emerging at the very moment when society became stratified. Warfare also intensified with civilization. While violence existed long before cities, urban societies created specialized armies, formal campaigns, and systematic conflict fortifications around early cities speak to collective fears. Thick walls, guarded gates, and elaborate defences suggest inhabitants lived under constant threat of invasion. Stress shifted from acute danger, being hunted by predators, to prolonged anticipation of human conflict. The body, built for brief moments of crisis, now lived within structures designed to withstand siege. Historical records from Mesopotamia and Egypt document famines, raids, and political upheavals that would have created cycles of fear lasting years. Urban sanitation posed another unique challenge. Waste accumulated quickly, water sources became contaminated, diseases spread easily among tightly packed populations. Skeletons from early cities show increased rates of infection, anemia, and chronic illness. While the stress system can assist in short-term immune responses, constant exposure to pathogens placed enormous strain on bodies not designed for persistent disease environments. Childhood mortality was high. Parents lived with the silent tension of uncertainty, never knowing which illnesses would pass and which would take their children. This emotional burden, though invisible in the archaeological record, is a logical extension of the conditions uncovered. Sleep also changed. Before large settlements, humans moved through natural light cycles. Night meant quiet, darkness, and limited activity. Cities' extended daylight lamps, fires, and communal gatherings produced light that shifted sleep patterns. Ancient texts describe nighttime work, late rituals, and early morning duties. Noise from neighbours, animals, and guards further interrupted rest. A body that evolved to recover deeply at night now slept in shorter, more fragmented intervals over time. This shaped how individuals responded to daily pressures. Reduced sleep alters attention, mood, and physical resilience, creating a feedback loop that increased vulnerability to stress. Crowding made emotional regulation more complicated. In small groups, conflicts could be resolved through distance. Someone could leave the group temporarily or shift alliances within a small social network. In cities, leaving was rarely an option. People lived next to rivals, debts accumulated, disputes festered, and social roles hardened. Clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia document legal conflicts over property, inheritance, and trade. These records offer glimpses into the emotional stresses of early bureaucratic life. Someone unable to pay a debt did not face a predator. They faced shame, judgment, and often severe penalties. Stress became bound not to physical danger but to social expectation. The emergence of political authority intensified this pressure. Kings, priests, and administrators could demand labour, exact taxes, or enforce laws. Individuals experienced stress not from natural threats, but from navigating systems controlled by other humans. Decisions about land distribution, legal disputes, and public works filtered through layers of authority. These structures created new forms of anxiety, fear of punishment, worry over reputation, and uncertainty about decisions made far above one's control. Markets added further complexity. Trade networks connected cities across continents, allowing goods, ideas, and diseases to move quickly. Economic instability could ripple through regions when harvests failed, wars broke out, or trade routes closed. For individuals, this meant financial uncertainty. Stress was no longer a matter of having enough food today. It was tied to fluctuations in systems too large for anyone to predict. Archaeological evidence of abandoned cities, collapsed states, and shifting political centres shows how fragile these early systems could be. Religious structures also influenced stress patterns. In many early civilizations, rituals governed everything from planting seasons to royal succession. Success or failure of crops was often interpreted as divine favour or punishment. People lived with the fear that their actions or the actions of leaders might disrupt cosmic balance. While rituals provided community cohesion, they also imposed obligations and expectations that deepened emotional burdens. A missed ritual or misinterpreted omen could provoke anxiety tied to fears of drought or misfortune. Life in ancient cities also meant exposure to chronic noise, odours, and visual overload. Excavations of ancient streets reveal thick layers of debris, household waste, and animal dung living conditions that today might feel overwhelming when normal. This constant sensory stimulation pressured the nervous system in ways that foragers and early farmers never encountered. Stress became less about immediate danger and more about living in an environment that never fully quieted. As societies grew, information spread more widely. Rumours of war, news of political intrigue, and stories of natural disasters travelled through marketplaces, gatherings, and religious spaces. For the first time, individuals could feel stressed about events far beyond their immediate surroundings. A drought hundreds of kilometres away could affect grain prices. A distant army could trigger fears of displacement. Stress became tied to social imagination, the ability to fear things not yet real. And yet, amid these pressures, civilization also offered forms of resilience. Public granaries helped buffer lean years. Complex legal systems resolved disputes without violence. Temples created shared identity and communal meaning. Families and neighborhoods formed support networks. Humans adapted not only biologically but culturally, developing rituals, stories, and institutions that helped manage uncertainty. Stress did not vanish, but it became shaped by collective strategies. Still, the archaeological record shows that inequality created persistent burdens. Skeletons of labourers in ancient Egypt reveal spinal stress from carrying heavy loads. Remains from Roman-era cities show signs of repetitive strain from grinding grain and constructing buildings. People at the bottom of the social hierarchy bore a disproportionate share of physical and psychological weight. Stress became stratified, following lines of status and occupation. By the time we reached the early modern period around the 18th century, cities had grown into sprawling hubs of trade, politics, and cultural life. But the underlying pressures remained. Crowding, noise, inequality, disease, and responsibility continued to shape daily life. The stress system, once honed for acute threats, adapted to a world where danger rarely arrived suddenly but lingered quietly in the background. What stands out, looking back with humility, is that civilization expanded the scope of stress from individual survival to collective complexity. Humans carried the same biological tools, but lived in environments those tools were never originally designed for. Stress became intertwined with identity, status, obligation, and ambition. It became something each person carried not only in the body, but in the social world constructed around them. We cannot know every detail. Bones, tablets, ruins, and written chronicles offer fragments, not full portraits. But the patterns are clear enough to trace. As humans built civilizations, they built pressures alongside them. Stress changed shape, following the architecture of cities, the hierarchies of society, and the rhythms of shared life. Imagine this. The year is 1800, and a worker stands at the entrance of a textile mill as the sun rises, not because their body woke naturally, but because a factory bell told them to. The sound is harsh, metallic, and absolute. It cuts through the morning air with a command no animal instinct ever prepared a human to obey inside. Hundreds of machines roar in unison, each one louder than a storm. The worker's heart beats a little faster, not because of danger in the traditional sense, but because the body has no script for this kind of world. For the first time in human history, life has begun to move faster than biology. To understand how this transformation altered the stress system shaped over millions of years, we must step into the period between 1800 and 1950. Human evolution had prepared our bodies for physical threats, short bursts of high intensity, long spans of recovery, and rhythms shaped by sun, seasons, and shared labour. The Industrial Revolution shattered those rhythms. It replaced sunlight with gas lamps and later electric bulbs, replaced communal schedules with rigid factory clocks, and replaced open landscapes with dense urban smoke. Humans found themselves living inside a pace they did not evolve for, and the stress systems that once saved lives now began straining under new pressures. Factories were among the first environments to push human physiology toward limits it had never encountered. Machines demanded precision and repetition, not bursts of effort. Workers stood for hours performing the same movements, often without pause. The noise was relentless. Contemporary accounts describe mills as deafening halls where shouts were swallowed by mechanical thunder. In such environments, stress signals that once triggered vigilance and quick movement instead had nowhere to go. The body prepared for action, but action was forbidden. Muscles tensed with no release. Hearts raced without purpose. Adrenaline rose without an outlet. Shift work introduced another challenge. For hundreds of thousands of years, human sleep followed natural light cycles. The Industrial Revolution broke that synchrony. Gas lamps extended daylight artificially. Factories operated through nights. Workers were assigned shifts that began long before dawn or ended deep into darkness. The body's internal clock, tuned to subtle cues of light and temperature, struggled to adapt. Fatigue accumulated in ways evolution had never prepared. For stress responses became more sensitive, firing earlier and remaining active longer. Noise became a new form of chronic pressure. In ancient environments, noise signaled danger, a snapping twig, a predator's call, a sudden storm. The body evolved to treat loud or unexpected sound as a threat. But industrial cities created constant background noise, metal on metal, carts on cobblestone, machinery rumbling beneath floors, whistles marking shifts, trains rattling through crowded districts. These sounds were not dangerous, but the body reacted as if they might be stress signals activated repeatedly throughout the day, not because of predators, but because of environmental overwhelm. Pollution added another layer. Factory smoke filled the air with particulates that irritated lungs, eyes, and skin. The body interpreted these irritants as threats, triggering immune responses that demanded energy. Chronic exposure produced inflammation that interacted with stress systems, making workers more reactive and less resilient. Coal dust, sulfur fumes, and soot settled on skin and clothing, reminding people constantly of their industrial environment. Even indoors, air quality was poor. The stress system, meant to respond to internal and external cues of danger, reacted continually to polluted surroundings. Urban density intensified the experience. By the mid-19th century, cities like London, Manchester and New York overflowed with migrants seeking factory work. Housing was cramped. Entire families lived in single rooms. Narrow alleyways and shared courtyards meant that privacy was rare. The stress of crowding, something we can trace across deep history in early cities, now increased exponentially. Noise, smells, social tension, and constant proximity created environments where the stress system remained activated far beyond its evolutionary purpose. Time itself changed. For most of human history, time was cyclical. Days followed the sun, seasons followed nature's rhythms, and work followed need rather than schedule. The Industrial Revolution introduced mechanical time, clocks dictating every movement. Workers rose, worked, ate, and slept according to bells, not bodies. This rigid structure created stress whenever a person's natural energy rhythms clashed with external demands. Being late was not simply inconvenient. It could mean losing work, wages, or housing. The stress system, which evolved to manage danger, now activated in response to clock pressure. The pace of work also accelerated. Machines did not tire, they did not rest. Humans had to match their speed. Factories reorganized labor to maximize output, creating tasks that required constant attention, rapid judgment, and coordination with machines that could injure or kill if someone faltered. Stress responses, once ideal for short-term emergencies, now activated during every moment of perceived risk. Every time a machine jammed, a belt slipped, or a loom snapped forward unexpectedly. Women and children faced particular pressures. Historical records and skeletal remains reveal long hours, heavy labour, and poor nutrition among working-class families. Children as young as 8 worked in mines and mills, their developing bodies exposed to stress that left marks on bones and growth patterns. Women often balanced factory work with domestic responsibilities, creating double workloads. The stress systems that evolved for survival now confronted tasks that never ended. By the late 19th century, labour movements began documenting what they called nervous exhaustion. Physicians reported increases in fatigue, irritability, sleep issues, and what they described as functional disorders. These were early descriptions of what we might today consider chronic stress. People felt overwhelmed not because of predators, but because of the grind of daily life. Their bodies responded as if they were in danger, even when the danger was structural rather than physical. The early 20th century continued this acceleration. Trains, telegraphs, assembly lines, and then mass production further compressed time cities grew denser. Light pollution extended working hours even more. Industrial labour required long shifts that disregarded biological limits. Stress responses activated in response to noise, heat, machinery, and deadlines that moved more quickly than humans could comfortably adapt to. It was during this era that the first scientific studies of stress emerged. One of the most influential figures was Hans Selye, a physician in the early 20th century who observed that diverse illnesses produce similar patterns in the body: elevated metabolic activity, muscle tension, and hormonal changes. He described what he called the general adaptation syndrome, arguing that stress was a biological response triggered by both physical and emotional pressures. Selye's work introduced the idea that the stress system could become overloaded, not only by life or death events but by continuous demands. Industrial accidents reveal another dimension of stress. Records show that fatigue, distraction, and physical strain contributed to errors that could be catastrophic. Mines collapsed, machines caught clothing, boilers exploded. The stress system, built for immediate threats, sometimes misfired under conditions where vigilance had to be maintained for hours without pause. When the system finally faltered, the consequences could be devastating. War amplified these pressures further. Soldiers in the 19th and early 20th centuries faced environments of noise, unpredictability, and relentless tension. Letters and memoirs describe symptoms of what was then called shell shock, a term used during the First World War to describe psychological and physical collapse amid sustained artillery fire. Though different from industrial stress, the underlying mechanisms show how the human body reacted when exposed to unending threat, a pattern not far removed from factory labour and urban overcrowding. By the mid-20th century, workplaces had begun to acknowledge burnout as a recognisable condition. While the term itself was not yet widely used, descriptions appeared in medical journals: exhaustion, cynicism, reduced capacity to work, and emotional fatigue. These were not failures of character. They were signs of a stress system being asked to function in ways evolution had never anticipated. What stands out when we look back at this era is the sheer mismatch between biology and environment. Humans entered the Industrial Revolution with a stress system perfectly tuned for acute dangers, bursts of effort, and periods of rest. But factories, cities, machines, and schedules introduced a world where demands never ceased. The emergency mode, once rare, became a daily experience. We cannot know every personal story. Diaries, photographs, medical reports, and bones offer glimpses but not full accounts. Yet the broad patterns are clear. By the early 20th century, humans had built a world that moved faster than their bodies could comfortably follow. The stress system had become both a tool for survival and a source of strain. It was no longer activated only when needed, but when required by the structure of modern life. And in that shift, something fundamental changed. Stress was no longer a signal of danger. It became a signal of pace. It is the middle of the 20th century, and for the first time in human history, danger is no longer the most reliable source of stress. A man sits in a quiet living room in 1950, reading the evening newspaper. Outside, there are no predators. Inside, the temperature is comfortable, the food supply is stable, and the world appears safer than it has ever been. And yet, as he reads headlines about distant wars, economic uncertainty, and shifting cultural landscapes, his heart tightens for reasons his ancestors would not recognize. Something is happening that no previous generation ever had to face. Stress without a tangible threat, fear without a physical source. The landscape is safe, but the mind is no longer sure. From this moment forward, stress begins to grow in directions evolution never anticipated. The human stress system, perfected for millions of years to handle physical emergencies, enters an era where emergencies are mostly symbolic but constant, and the systems built for rare, acute bursts begin encountering something new: endless stimulation. In the decades following 1950, cities grow rapidly. Urbanization accelerates at a scale and pace unseen in earlier history. Millions move into crowded apartments, high-rise towers, and neighborhoods dense with people, noise, and motion. The human sensory system, shaped it open landscapes where sound meant danger and silence meant safety, now receives constant input. Car horns, construction, radios, television sets, and the hum of electrical infrastructure become the new background. Noise, once an alarm signal, transforms into an environmental constant. yet the body still reacts as if every sharp sound might matter. By the 1960s, media begins to play a growing role in daily life. Televisions flicker in living rooms, broadcasting events from across the world. For the first time, families witness war, famine, disaster, and political tension in real time. These images are distant yet emotionally immediate. The stress system cannot differentiate between a threat in one's home and a threat on a screen. The body responds to stories as if they are lived experience. Researchers of the time begin noticing that anxiety symptoms rise in correlation with media exposure. Although the science is still early and imperfect, economic shifts create another layer of strain. The mid-20th century is marked by post-war booms, but prosperity is uneven. Many families experience rising costs, job instability, and rapidly shifting industries. The idea of lifelong employment begins to erode. Factories close. New types of work emerge that demand mental rather than physical endurance. The stress once triggered by predators is now triggered by uncertainty. Will the job last? Can the bills be paid? Will a single unexpected event unravel stability? The stress system, built for immediate physical threats, struggles with these long-term abstract pressures. Urban sprawl intensifies. By the 1970s and 1980s, megacities reshape human experience. Light pollution obscures the night sky, erasing one of the most ancient signals of circadian rhythm. Constant illumination disrupts internal clocks honed over millions of years. Streetlights, neon signs, 24-hour shops. These do not attack the body directly, yet they impose a form of biological confusion. The brain's perception of day and night blurs. Sleep disturbances increase, and sleep, which evolved as the primary reset for the stress system, becomes compromised. The rise of global communication accelerates everything. Telephones make distance irrelevant. News travels faster than ever. Later, cable television broadcasts updates around the clock. For the first time, there is no such thing as being off. Humans who once lived by natural cycles now adjust to technological rhythms. The stress system, which resets during rest, receives fewer and fewer opportunities to recover. By the late 20th century, something unprecedented occurs. Multitasking becomes a cultural expectation. Offices shift from paper to computers, from letters to emails, from scheduled meetings to constant communication. Screens multiply. Workers juggle tasks at a pace that outstrips the body's evolutionary design. Attention becomes fragmented. And every small disruption, every phone ring, every message, every alarm, triggers microbursts of stress. Individually they seem trivial, but cumulatively they erode the boundaries that once protected the mind. Social comparison, once limited to small communities, becomes global. Television shows, magazines, advertisements, and later digital platforms create a constant stream of idealized bodies, lifestyles, and achievements. The stress system, evolved to track status within small groups, now monitors millions of strangers. This creates a form of baseline tension, a quiet feeling of inadequacy, vigilance, or pressure to match impossible standards. Biologically, humans were never meant to compare themselves to the entire world. Economic precarity deepens through the late 20th century and early 21st. Gig work, temporary contracts, unstable housing markets, and cycles of recession reshape daily life. Fear of falling behind becomes widespread. The body interprets financial threat as existential threat, because for most of history, scarcity meant hunger or displacement. Even when food and shelter remain available, the body cannot distinguish between physical and symbolic forms of insecurity. By the early 21st century, digital devices accelerate everything again. The smartphone introduces a new type of stressor, the notification. Each buzz, beep or vibration functions like a tiny alarm, triggering reflexive attention. Evolution prepared humans to react instantly to sudden signals, but in the modern world these signals occur dozens or hundreds of times a day. Every message carries emotional weight, expectation, demand, social pressure, or uncertainty. The stress response activates repeatedly, often without conscious awareness. Information overload becomes another pressure. For the first time in the history of the species, humans can consume more information in a single day than their ancestors encountered in an entire year. News, alerts, videos, updates, tragedies, scandals, opinions. It floods the mind continuously. The stress system, designed to process immediate surroundings, now processes global data with no clear boundaries. Cognitive fatigue increases. Emotional exhaustion rises. The mind begins to feel stretched, not by danger, but by input. Work becomes omnipresent. Remote communication makes labour portable. Emails arrive at night. Messages arrive during meals. The boundary between work and rest erodes. Stress, once triggered by predators or crises, now emerges from the inability to disconnect. The body remains in a state of low-level readiness, waiting for the next task, the next demand, the next interruption. Cities expand into mega-regions, commutes lengthen, traffic congestion becomes a daily test of patience. The body, confined in cramped spaces for hours, experiences physical tension that mimics ancient stress responses, clenched muscles, elevated heart rate, narrowed attention. Yet there is no danger to resolve, no sprint to run, no way to release the built pressure. Stress accumulates like sediment. Noise pollution intensifies further. Sirens, engines, aircraft, subways, construction drills. Studies show that even when people believe they have adapted, their bodies still react with micro bursts of stress hormones. It is not a conscious reaction, but an automatic one, encoded in deep biological circuits. The stress system responds as if the environment contains threats, even when the threats are mechanical and repetitive. Social dynamics shift again with digital platforms. People experience constant partial attention, always aware of others, always visible, always performing. The stress of being observed becomes subtle but persistent. The modern social landscape demands a level of self-monitoring that ancient humans never endured. Reputation, once confined to small groups, becomes a global metric. By the early 21st century, humans live in a paradox. Material comfort is higher than ever, life expectancy rises, food security increases, predators vanish. Yet the stress system is more active than at any point in recorded history, not because danger grew, but because signals of demand multiplied. The body interprets stimulation as urgency. The mind interprets speed as threat. And together they create a form of tension that has no clear endpoint. We do not know every detail. Scientists still debate the interplay between constant stimulation, sleep disruption, economic strain, and digital environments. But the broad pattern is unmistakable. The stress system has become misaligned with the world it now inhabits. It was built for emergencies, yet it encounters none of the natural rhythms or recovery periods it once depended on. The result is a kind of silent fatigue that spans continents, a persistent sense of being on, a background hum of vigilance, a narrowing of attention toward demands rather than possibilities. Stress, once a rare burst of survival energy, becomes a continuous state of existence, not because life is harder, but because the mind is carrying more than it evolved to bear. Imagine this. Inside you right now, millions of tiny alarms are ringing. Not loudly, not dramatically, but softly, constantly, like distant echoes of a danger that never arrives. You do not feel them as sound. You feel them as tiredness, irritability, fog, heaviness, the strange ache behind your eyes after a long day. These sensations are not random. They are the surface ripples of something happening far deeper, inside the microscopic machinery that keeps you alive. When your stress system, built for brief emergencies, never fully switches off, your cells begin to change. Not suddenly, not violently, but slowly, like metal placed under a constant strain that was meant only for storms. To understand what stress does to the body, we have to step inside the network that responds every time you sense threat. At the center is a pathway that connects your brain, your hormones, and your organs. When something feels urgent, your brain sends a signal to the adrenal glands perched above your kidneys. Those glands release chemical messengers designed to prepare you for action. In a short-term emergency, this system works brilliantly. But when the signal persists long after the threat is gone, those same chemicals begin to erode the very structures they were meant to protect. One of the most important of these messengers is cortisol. This hormone regulates energy, metabolism, immune function, and even aspects of memory. Under a sudden threat, cortisol mobilizes glucose, sharpens awareness, and delays processes that are not immediately necessary. But when the stress signal becomes constant, cortisol no longer rises and falls in a healthy rhythm. Instead, its levels begin to misalign. Sometimes they remain elevated throughout the day. Sometimes they spike at night when you should be resting. Sometimes they drop too low, leaving you exhausted and unfocused. This dysregulation disrupts the body's internal timing. Systems that once operated in harmony begin working at cross purposes. At the cellular level, cortisol alters the way your body manages glucose. Cells become less responsive to insulin, the hormone that helps them absorb sugar from the bloodstream. The body interprets this resistance as a sign that it must produce more insulin. Over time, this cycle strains the pancreas and disrupts metabolic balance. Excess glucose continues circulating, increasing the risk of metabolic disorders. What began as a survival mechanism, meant to provide emergency fuel, becomes a slow-burning disruption of the body's energy economy. The effects on the immune system are equally complex. Under short-term stress, the immune system is sharpened, ready to respond to wounds or infection. But when stress is chronic, the immune response splits in two directions. One branch becomes suppressed. Essential defenses weaken. People become more susceptible to common infections. Injuries heal more slowly. The immune system becomes less capable of identifying and eliminating abnormal cells, increasing long-term health risks. Meanwhile, the other branch becomes overactive, producing chronic low-level inflammation. This type of inflammation does not heal wounds. Instead, it damages tissues gradually, contributing to conditions that range from joint pain to cardiovascular strain. The body becomes a place of conflicting signals, too weak in some areas, too aggressive in others. Blood vessels respond to chronic stress as well. Under acute threat, increased blood pressure is protective. It moves oxygen quickly to the muscles. But when this heightened pressure persists for weeks or years, the vessel walls begin to change. They become less flexible. Microtears form. The body repairs these tears by adding layers of cells, which slowly thicken the vessel walls. This process narrows the passageways through which blood flows. The heart must work harder, beating against increasing resistance. Over time, this strain elevates the risk of cardiovascular disease. It happens quietly, without the person feeling a specific moment when the damage begins. Stress alters the architecture of the cardiovascular system through repetition rather than crisis. The digestive system is deeply affected too. Under threat, digestion slows. The body temporarily redirects energy away from processing food. This is helpful during an emergency but problematic when stress becomes habitual. The stomach produces more acid. The intestines contract irregularly. Nutrient absorption becomes inconsistent. People may experience cramps, discomfort, or irregular digestion, not because of diet, but because the stress system keeps interfering with the body's natural rhythm. Over years, this pattern can reshape gut function in ways that are difficult to fully reverse. Inside the brain, the effects of chronic stress are perhaps the most striking. Certain regions become overactive. Others begin to shrink. The amygdala, which detects threat, becomes more sensitive. It responds more quickly and more intensely. The hippocampus, which helps regulate stress responses and store memories, begins to lose volume when exposed to prolonged cortisol spikes. Neurons within it retract their branches. This reduces the brain's ability to form stable memories and maintain emotional balance. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, reasoning and moderating impulses, also becomes less efficient. Circuits that once allowed for calm reflection struggle to activate. Stress begins to shape thought itself, nudging the mind toward urgency, vigilance, and narrow focus. The body interprets this pattern as necessary for survival, even when the environment contains no physical danger. At the structural level, chronic stress alters neural pathways through a process known as pruning. The brain, always adapting, trims connections that are underused and strengthens those that receive constant activity. When stress dominates daily experience, pathways related to fear, worry, and rapid reaction become reinforced. Pathways related to calm reasoning and emotional regulation become less prominent. Over time, this creates loops. Worry triggers stress. Stress triggers sharper worry, and the cycle deepens. These changes do not mean something is wrong with the person. They reflect the brain's attempt to adapt to what it perceives as an ongoing emergency. Hormonal systems also begin to shift. Under persistent stress, the balance between different hormones becomes disrupted. Systems involved in growth, reproduction, and long-term repair slow down. The body interprets chronic stress as a signal that the environment is unstable. It prioritizes short-term survival over long-term maintenance. This trade-off, which once made sense in ancient emergencies, becomes harmful when it lasts for years. Cells receive fewer resources for repair. Tissues rejuvenate more slowly. Aging accelerates microscopically, long before it becomes visible. At the level of the mitochondria, the tiny structures that generate energy inside cells, stress creates additional strain. Mitochondria respond to cortisol by altering how they produce energy. Under constant activation, they begin generating more reactive oxygen molecules, which can damage cellular components if not neutralized. This oxidative stress contributes to accelerated aging at the cellular level. The body has natural defenses against such damage, but these defenses can become overwhelmed when stress never subsides. Even the ends of chromosomes, structures called telomeres, respond to chronic stress. Telomeres act like protective caps. They shorten naturally with age, but prolonged stress can accelerate their shortening. When telomeres become too short, cells lose the ability to divide safely. This contributes to cellular aging and reduces the body's ability to repair itself. The process is subtle but measurable. It suggests that stress can leave a fingerprint at the deepest levels of biological time. None of this happens instantly. It accumulates gradually, often unnoticed. People may feel more tired, more irritable, less resilient. They may find that small problems trigger larger reactions. They may notice that sleep becomes lighter, thought becomes more scattered, or the body feels heavier after ordinary tasks. These are not merely psychological symptoms, they reflect the ongoing conversation inside the body, the stress system telling every organ, every tissue, every cell that the world remains dangerous even when it is not. Evolution shaped the stress response to save lives, but when it activates constantly, it reshapes the body in ways that drain energy, clarity, and health. What makes this process so difficult to recognize is its silence. Chronic stress rarely announces itself with a single dramatic event. Instead, it settles in quietly, embedding itself into routine. The signals it sends feel like fatigue, like worry, like restlessness, like the sense that something is always slightly wrong. But beneath those sensations lies a far deeper story, the architecture of the body adjusting to a threat that never ends. We do not yet understand every mechanism. Research continues. Scientists uncover new pathways, new interactions, new consequences each year. But the outline is clear enough to see. Prolonged stress alters the body at every level, from hormones to heart function to the shape of the brain itself. It transforms an ancient superpower into a slow pressure that touches every system. And once that pressure becomes familiar, the body forgets what it feels like to be calm. A single breath, drawn slowly after a long day, and for a moment your chest softens in a way you did not intend. No crisis is solved, no problem has disappeared, and yet something inside you loosens, almost shyly, as if a creature that has been hiding steps into the light to check whether the world is safe. This tiny shift is not poetic, it is biological. It is the first flicker of the system humans evolved to turn the emergency mode off, a mechanism as ancient as the first vertebrates and as delicate as a heartbeat. To understand how a human body knows when it is safe again, we have to follow the slow currents that oppose stress, currents that work quietly and constantly, restoring balance molecule by molecule. When danger fades, the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system takes the lead. This system is not dramatic. It does not accelerate the heart or sharpen the eyes or flood the muscles with fuel. It moves in the opposite direction. It is the biology of exhale, of lowering shoulders, of sinking into sleep. Scientists sometimes describe it as rest and digest, but those words barely capture its complexity. It is a network that signals every organ that the threat has passed. It slows the heart, it deepens breathing, it restarts digestion, it repairs tissues, it reactivates the immune system's calmer functions. It is the body's quiet vote for survival through recovery rather than action. At the centre of this shift is the vagus nerve, a long wandering strand that runs from the brainstem through the throat, chest and abdomen. The vagus nerve carries messages of safety. When activated, it tells the heart to slow. It tells the lungs to soften. It tells the gut to resume its work. Unlike stress, which is fast and explosive, vagal activation is slow and layered. It takes time for the body to trust that danger is gone, but once it does, the vagus nerve becomes a conductor guiding the body toward a state where healing can begin. This biological off switch is triggered by cues that would have made sense to ancient humans. One of the strongest is deep, rhythmic breathing. When breathing slows, it sends a signal directly to the vagus nerve. The heart follows, blood pressure drops, muscles unclench. This is not something learned through culture, it is embedded in our physiology. A long exhale is an ancient reassurance, a message that the sprint has ended, that safety is possible. Another cue is slowness itself. Fast motion is associated with threat. Predators charge. Storms move quickly. Human danger often arrives abruptly. But slow movement, soft walking, gentle hand gestures, unhurried posture, tells the nervous system that the environment is calm. In laboratories, researchers have observed that heart rates synchronize with slow sensory input. Even watching something move gently can activate the recovery systems of the body. It is a reminder that the world is not in crisis. Warmth also plays a role. For early humans, warmth signaled shelter, firelight, bodies gathered together, protection from predators and the cold. Today, warmth still calms the nervous system. Warm light, warm hands, warm water, warm air. The vagus nerve responds to these cues as if acknowledging the presence of safety long before the mind understands it consciously. Sound may be one of the most powerful regulators. Soft, predictable sounds, wind in trees, gentle water, low human voices, tell the brain that the environment is not hostile. Sudden loud noises once signalled danger. But steady natural soundscapes were background signals of safety for millions of years. Modern research shows that these sounds lower heart rate, reduce muscle tension, and enhance parasympathetic activity. For ancient humans, these sounds meant predators were far away. For us, they still carry the same message. One of the most intriguing aspects of the off switch is that humans rarely activate it alone. We are a communal species. For most of our history, we rested among others, breathing together around a fire, walking together, sleeping in groups. These shared rhythms shaped our physiology. When people gather calmly today, something similar happens. Heartbeats begin to match. Breathing patterns synchronize. The presence of another calm person reduces activity in the brain regions responsible for vigilance. The body interprets a relaxed companion as evidence that the world is safe enough to lower its guard. Touch reinforces this even more deeply. A hand on the shoulder, a gentle hug, a parent holding a child, all send signals through pressure receptors in the skin that activate the parasympathetic system. These signals bypass thought entirely. They do not ask the brain whether the world is safe. They tell it. Calm human contact has been shown to reduce cortisol levels and increase heart rate variability, a measure of resilience and recovery. This is not sentiment. It is biology shaped by millions of years of social living. Nature triggers these recovery systems as well. For ancient humans, natural landscapes were familiar terrain. Open spaces allowed for visibility. Trees, rivers, and rocks provided resources and shelter. In such environments, stress responses quieted naturally. Today, even brief exposure to natural settings can lower blood pressure, reduce cortisol spikes, and enhance parasympathetic activation. The effect occurs even when people view natural imagery. The brain recognizes patterns, fractals in leaves, the movement of water, the symmetry of branches, that it learned long before cities existed. Inside the heart, a subtle mechanism known as heart rate variability responds to these cues. When the body feels safe, the intervals between beats fluctuate gently. This variability indicates flexibility. It shows that the nervous system can shift easily between action and rest. Under chronic stress, variability decreases. The heart becomes rigid, locked into narrow rhythms. But when the off switch activates, variability increases again. It is a biological sign of recovery, a measure of the body remembering how to move between states, instead of being trapped in vigilance. The digestive system also signals safety. When the fight or flight response is active, digestion slows. But when the body senses safety, the opposite occurs. The gut resumes its work, releasing enzymes, moving food through the intestines, absorbing nutrients. These processes are signs that the emergency has passed. They are physical expressions of calm, even when the mind remains preoccupied. One of the most fascinating aspects of the recovery system is that it operates through feedback loops. The body listens to itself. When the heart slows, the brain interprets this as evidence of safety, which in turn strengthens parasympathetic activation. When breathing deepens, the brain perceives the lack of urgency, which then slows stress hormone release. These loops create a self-reinforcing cycle. Calm produces more calm. Safety cues do not erase stress. They guide the body back toward equilibrium. They remind ancient circuits that the present moment does not require emergency action. They allow tissues to repair, thoughts to settle, and energy to return to systems that were deprived during prolonged vigilance. We do not understand every detail of these mechanisms. Ongoing research continues to reveal the complexities of the vagus nerve, the role of sensory pathways, and the deep connection between environment and physiology. But the central pattern is clear. The human body possesses a sophisticated system designed to switch the emergency mode off. It does so through signals of slowness, warmth, rhythm, nature, and companionship. These cues reach into ancient circuits and guide them gently toward rest. And when they work, something remarkable happens. The body remembers that it was never meant to live in constant tension. It rediscovers the sensation of safety, not through logic, but through biology. What if I told you that the future of our species is being shaped right now, not by technology or climate or politics, but by something as small and silent as stress hormones drifting through the bloodstream? Imagine someone living a century from today. Their world glows with abundance. Their devices anticipate needs before they arise. Their homes speak. Their roads hum with quiet machines. But inside their body, ancient circuits continue firing at the same pace they did when danger had teeth and claws. The world has changed, but the body has not. And the question that sits quietly beneath the next 100 or 1,000 years is simple. What happens if this mismatch never closes? To think about the future human, we must begin with something we already know from the present. Chronic stress leaves marks on biology. Some of those marks do not stop with one lifetime, they ripple into the next. Epigenetics, the study of chemical switches that control how genes behave, has revealed that prolonged stress can alter these switches. It does not rewrite DNA. It changes how easily the instructions can be read. In animals, and increasingly in humans, researchers have documented that stress experienced by parents can influence how the stress systems of their children respond. It is not destiny. It is probability. A tiny shift in how sensitive receptors become. A small change in how quickly cortisol rises or falls. Over generations, if conditions remain the same, these patterns may accumulate. The future human may inherit not only eye colour or height, but also the echoes of worry carried by earlier generations. If such changes continue, our emotional bandwidth may begin to narrow. Emotional bandwidth is not a clinical term. It is a quiet phrase for the capacity to feel deeply without becoming overwhelmed. In a world of constant demand, the nervous system learns to blunt emotional responses simply to remain functional. It protects itself by reducing sensitivity, but the loss is subtle. People become less patient, less curious, less capable of lingering in calm states. Over centuries, if the environment continues to pour more signals into the mind than the mind was built to process, the baseline emotional landscape could shift toward vigilance. The biology of threat may overshadow the biology of wonder. Societies built under constant pressure often develop chronic inflammation, not just in individual bodies, but in cultural rhythms. Inflammation is a biological response designed for emergencies, to heal wounds, fight intruders, protect tissues. But when it remains active long-term, it becomes corrosive. In social terms, something similar can emerge. Communities under sustained strain become more reactive, less trusting, more prone to abrupt shifts in mood. The patterns we see today in cities overwhelmed by speed and information could grow more pronounced. A world with persistent stress may produce cultures that mirror the physiology of inflammation: hot, tense, reactive, always slightly on the edge. To cope with these pressures, future humans may increasingly turn to medical interventions. Some will be biological, targeted drugs that modulate stress hormones or their receptors. Others might be technological, bridging physiology with devices that track internal states, predicting burnout before it arrives. There may be efforts to engineer resilience, gene editing to soften the effects of cortisol, synthetic molecules that mimic the body's own calming systems, implants that monitor heart rate variability and activate recovery pathways when needed. These interventions could be life-saving, but they also raise philosophical questions. If we engineer away the discomfort, do we also erase something essential about being human? Stress is not only pain, it is the spark behind courage, urgency, learning, memory, adaptation. To silence it fully would mean altering the very mechanism that carried us through millions of years, yet history suggests another possible future, one not driven by medicine but by collective behaviour. When large-scale societies become too fast, too crowded, too complex, people often migrate psychologically or physically back towards smaller communities, not necessarily villages or tribes, but networks where human-scale interaction returns. Places where the nervous system can recognize safety because faces are familiar, rhythms are slower, and demands do not exceed capacity. If stress continues to escalate unchecked, part of humanity might seek refuge in smaller circles, rediscovering the scale at which our biology functions best. This would not be regression. It would be adaptation by remembering. It's also possible that the future human becomes a creature who feels less internal conflict about living in comfort. For most of history, survival required action. Ease was rare. Safety was temporary. Our bodies learned to respond to comfort with brief relaxation, not extended peace. But over hundreds or thousands of years, if comfort becomes consistent, evolution may respond. The stress system might recalibrate. Receptors could become less reactive. Hormonal rhythms might shift. Humans may eventually develop a physiology more suited to continuous security than intermittent danger. But such changes require vast stretches of time, far beyond the horizon of any individual life. The greatest uncertainty is philosophical. If we remain bodies shaped by danger, living in a world shaped by convenience, how do we locate meaning? Our ancestors understood the purpose of stress. It kept them alive today. Stress often activates without purpose, creating tension without necessity. This mismatch can leave people feeling unanchored, as if the alarm bells inside them ring for reasons they cannot name. The future may amplify this feeling if the environment becomes even safer while the body remains just as reactive. That leads to a larger question about what it means to be human in an era where the biological logic of stress no longer matches the world it inhabits. If evolution cannot keep up with the speed of modern life, the burden shifts to culture, community, and consciousness. Not to solve stress, but to understand it with a different kind of clarity. that it is an ancient system trying to protect an organism that no longer lives inside its original ecosystem. Some futures may be filled with intervention and control, others may rely on reconnection and scale. Most will contain a mixture of both, but across all possibilities, one truth remains steady. Humans will continue carrying ancient alarms, and those alarms will continue trying to make sense of whatever world they find themselves in. And perhaps the future divides along a quiet choice, not a technological revolution, not a genetic transformation, but the choice between runaway stress and deliberate equilibrium, between a physiology dragged forward by a world moving too fast, and a humanity that pauses long enough to hear its own signals. We cannot know which path will dominate. We can only say that the biology is still speaking even now, and meaning returns only when we learn to listen.